Something extraordinary is happening right now in the world of celebrity lifestyle brands. And this story cuts deeper than another famous name slapping their identity onto overpriced products and hoping nobody looks too closely. What's unfolding with Meghan Markle's As Ever brand is a masterclass in the collision between carefully constructed image and stubborn, unforgiving reality. Between what a brand promises its customers and what those customers actually discover when they open the box. Before we get into it, subscribe right now if you want coverage that follows the actual story rather than the official narrative. Hit the like button and drop a comment answering this. Have you ever paid premium prices for a product that turned out to be a complete disappointment? Tell me what happened, because your experience matters to this conversation. Now let's talk about candles. Specifically, let's talk about a $64 candle. Not a candle with rare essential oils sourced from remote mountain regions. Not a candle poured in small batches by artisan craftspeople with decades of experience. Just a candle, sitting in a jar, wearing a pretty label, carrying a price tag that communicates luxury, exclusivity, and what the brand founder herself described in her own words as a freakish attention to detail. You order this candle. You wait for delivery, with the particular anticipation that comes from spending real money on something you've convinced yourself represents quality. The package arrives. You open it carefully, almost reverently, because $64 deserves reverence. You lift out the candle, you examine it, and then you notice something. Something that takes a moment to register because your brain initially refuses to process what your eyes are clearly showing it. There is no wick. Not a damaged wick, not a short wick, not a wick buried too deep in the wax. Absolutely no wick of any kind whatsoever. A candle without a wick is not a candle. It is an expensive jar of decorative wax. It is an object that has adopted the aesthetic of a candle while being fundamentally, categorically incapable of performing the single function that separates a candle from any other cylinder of solidified fat. Now, imagine discovering this wasn't a one-time factory error. Imagine discovering that multiple customers across multiple separate orders received the identical product. Same missing component. Same premium price tag. Same gap between promise and reality. That's not a quality control failure. That's a pattern. And that pattern tells you something important about everything else happening with this brand, because the Wickless candle isn't the story. It's the symbol. It's the perfect physical embodiment of a brand that promised illumination and delivered darkness instead. Let's back up and understand what As Ever was supposed to be. This wasn't positioned as a casual celebrity side project. Meghan Markle didn't attach her name to an existing product line and collect a licensing fee. The brand was presented as a genuine personal vision, a distillation of her actual values, her genuine aesthetic sensibilities, her real approach to living well. The marketing narrative was sophisticated and deliberate. This was about elevating everyday moments, about bringing genuine craftsmanship to products that fill your home and your table. About the kind of thoughtful curation that separates someone with truly refined taste from someone merely performing refinement. The pricing architecture reinforced this positioning at every level. $64 for a candle communicates something specific to consumers. It says this isn't mass-produced. It says someone cared deeply about every element of this product. It says you're not buying an object, you're buying an experience, a philosophy, a fragment of an aspirational life. And customers wanted to believe it. That matters. These weren't people looking for reasons to be disappointed. They were people who genuinely hoped to find something worth the premium. They extended good faith and real money in equal measure. What they received in return deserves careful examination. The candle situation we've already established, but the product failures extended across the entire catalog in ways that suggest something more systemic than individual manufacturing mistakes. Consider the spreads and preserves, which occupied a central position in the brand's identity. Priced at $36 for a jar that customers describe as considerably smaller than its price tag suggests it should be. The visual presentation was carefully considered. The label design communicated artisan quality. The overall package successfully created an impression of premium provenance. Then customers opened the jars. Multiple reviews described a consistency problem so fundamental it undermines the product's basic identity. A spread is supposed to spread. That's definitional. When customers tilted their jars and watched the contents flow like liquid toward the lid, they weren't experiencing an artisan product with a distinctive texture. They were experiencing something that hadn't been formulated correctly for the category it claimed to occupy. One reviewer's description became widely shared. She said pouring it onto toast felt less like spreading a preserve and more like conducting a liquid transfer operation. At $36, that's not charming rusticity, that's a quality failure. The sealing problems represented a more serious concern. Multiple customers reported receiving jars with compromised vacuum seals. No satisfying resistance when opening. No indication that the contents had been properly protected from the moment of packaging through the transit process to arrival at their home. For ambient products like candles or decorative items, this is an aesthetic failure. For food products marketed at premium prices with premium provenance claims, compromised sealing is a food safety issue. These are edible products. They require proper preservation. Customers paying $36 for a jar of spread are entitled to reasonable confidence that the contents are safe to consume. When that basic assurance cannot be guaranteed, the brand hasn't just disappointed its customers, it has broken a fundamental obligation that no marketing language can paper over. The labeling quality issues became a recurring theme across customer accounts, with a consistency that's difficult to dismiss as isolated complaints. Labels applied at visible angles, labels that weren't properly smoothed, creating bubbles and creases across what should have been pristine presentation surfaces. One customer documented receiving a jar with a crooked label on the front and an equally crooked label on the back of the same container. This detail deserves a moment of consideration. Applying a label incorrectly once suggests a momentary lapse. Applying it incorrectly on both sides of the same product suggests a process with no meaningful quality verification at any stage. And this on a product from someone who specifically, publicly, repeatedly claimed that meticulous attention to detail was a defining characteristic of her approach. The tea products offered their own particular form of disappointment. Initial impressions were actually positive. The fragrance upon opening was described consistently as genuinely pleasant, legitimately aromatic, creating reasonable anticipation for the brewed result. That anticipation didn't survive contact with hot water. Brewed tea from multiple customers produced results described as barely differentiated from plain water. The scent that seemed so promising in the dry leaf apparently carried no flavor compounds that survived the brewing process. Beautiful packaging, appealing dry fragrance, negligible actual tea experience. All promise, no delivery. But the product revelation that generated the most sustained conversation, the one that crystallized something essential about the brand's relationship with its customers, involved what were marketed as Sussex sprinkles. These were positioned as edible flower garnishes, an elevated finishing touch for food presentation. The kind of refined detail that transforms an ordinary dish into something worthy of the aspirational lifestyle the brand was selling. Sophisticated, distinctive, premium. Pet owners recognized them immediately. Not from some obscure specialist knowledge, from regular trips to standard pet supply retailers to purchase treats for rabbits, hamsters, and guinea pigs. The dried flower mix being sold as a luxury culinary garnish was identified by multiple customers as identical in composition and appearance to products marketed as small animal food, available at a fraction of the price. One reviewer, who has kept rabbits for several years, wrote that she recognized the product before she'd even finished opening the package. She included price comparisons. The numbers were not flattering to the brand's premium positioning. This is worth sitting with for a moment. The question isn't whether the flowers are technically edible. They presumably are, since animals consume them regularly. The question is what it reveals about the sourcing, the curation, and the fundamental respect for customers that supposedly underpins the entire brand philosophy. If the signature garnish product can be purchased at a pet store for a fraction of the retail price, what does that tell us about the sourcing philosophy behind the rest of the catalog? What does it suggest about the gap between the brand's stated commitment to quality and the actual procurement decisions being made? The wine component of the brand generated its own category of critical attention. Investigative work by multiple journalists and consumer advocates produced consistent findings, suggesting that what was being positioned as artisanal, small production wine was sourced from bulk suppliers whose primary market is corporate promotional purchasing. This is the commercial wine equivalent of the Sussex sprinkles situation. The same product available through lower prestige channels at dramatically lower prices, repackaged with premium branding and sold at a markup that only makes sense if customers don't investigate the supply chain. White label products are a legitimate business practice. Many brands use them. The problem isn't the practice itself. The problem is the specific claims being made about provenance, craftsmanship, and quality that justified the premium pricing. When the actual sourcing contradicts those claims, customers aren't just disappointed by a product, they feel deceived by a narrative. Now, there's a branding element to this story that requires direct address because it speaks to something beyond product quality. Princess Diana signed personal correspondence with the phrase, "as ever." It was her particular farewell, her intimate signature, something that connected her to people she cared about in a way that felt private and genuine. People who received letters from her with that closing treasured it precisely because it felt personal rather than formal. That phrase now belongs to a commercial brand selling candles, spreads, and what we've established may be repackaged small animal treats. There's no personal relationship with Diana to draw on here. No direct connection to her memory that would make this inheritance feel natural or appropriate. There's a son who carries her memory, and there's a brand that has appropriated his mother's personal signature for commerce. You can argue the technical legality, trademarking a phrase isn't illegal. What's harder to argue is that this choice demonstrates sensitivity, taste, or appropriate boundaries around a woman's legacy. Diana belonged to a lot of people emotionally. Monetizing the words she used to say goodbye to people she loved, attaching them to a product line that includes items of questionable quality and potentially misleading provenance claims, is a choice that reveals something about priorities and judgment that no amount of careful brand positioning can obscure. The contrast with another royal family business venture is instructive and worth examining directly. The Highgrove Estate, operated under King Charles, sells comparable products, preserves, candles, gift items. The price points are meaningfully lower across equivalent categories. The ingredients are sourced from the estate itself, providing genuine provenance rather than claimed provenance. Every penny of profit goes to charitable causes rather than personal accounts. Customer comparisons between the two product lines have been consistent enough to constitute a meaningful market verdict. People who purchase both have generally found the Highgrove product superior on quality metrics while being priced more accessibly. One royal family is using a lifestyle brand to support charitable work while delivering genuine quality at honest prices. The other is charging premium prices for products of questionable quality while keeping the profits private. The contrast isn't subtle, and customers making direct comparisons aren't being unfair. They're doing exactly what informed consumers should do. They're evaluating competing products against equivalent standards and reporting honestly what they found. The market noticed. It always does. The return situation that's now developing tells the clearest story of all. Returns were supposed to be functionally impossible. The brand's stated policy is explicit that products cannot be returned, citing the nature of the items being sold. This is a standard policy for food and consumable products that has legitimate commercial logic behind it. What's happening in practice is different. Returns are coming in anyway, and the scale is significant enough to have attracted attention. The customer service infrastructure is reportedly strained by the volume of complaints and return requests. But perhaps the most revealing detail is this: a meaningful proportion of returned items were never opened. Customers received their packages, examined the exterior presentation, found it wanting, and sent everything back without giving the products any opportunity to either meet or disappoint their expectations. When your customer base decides the product isn't worth opening, you haven't failed at quality control. You've failed at something more fundamental. You've failed to create even the basic threshold of credibility that makes people want to engage with what you've made. The high-profile endorsement from an extremely prominent media personality whose influence over consumer purchasing decisions is genuinely significant and well-documented couldn't move the needle. Products that received explicit, enthusiastic public endorsement from someone whose previous recommendations have created measurable commercial phenomena still sat in inventory rather than flying off virtual shelves. When an endorsement of that magnitude doesn't generate the expected response, the market is communicating something that marketing cannot solve. It's saying that the fundamental value proposition doesn't hold regardless of who vouches for it. What's particularly telling about the customer response is its tone. This isn't the organized negativity of critics with agendas or media outlets pursuing a predetermined narrative. The reviews and complaints and return requests are coming from people who wanted to believe in the products, who chose to spend $64 on a candle because they were genuinely interested in what the brand was offering. The disappointment in these accounts carries a specific texture. It's the disappointment of people who extended good faith and felt it wasn't reciprocated. who were told they were purchasing freakish attention to detail and received crooked labels and missing wicks instead. That's not cynicism finding confirmation. That's genuine customers discovering a gap between promise and reality and reacting accordingly. The fundamental problem this brand faces isn't a quality control crisis that better manufacturing partnerships can solve. It isn't a marketing challenge that more sophisticated positioning can address. It isn't even a perception problem that celebrity endorsements can rehabilitate. The fundamental problem is that the entire enterprise was built around an identity claim that the products themselves couldn't substantiate. When you tell people you're defined by meticulous attention to detail and then ship them candles without wicks, you haven't just failed to meet a quality standard. You've exposed the gap between the story you're telling about yourself and the reality of what you're actually delivering. Customers paid for the story. What they received was the reality. And the distance between those two things is what generates returns, complaints, and the kind of organic, critical attention that no public relations strategy can adequately contain. There's a lesson here that extends well beyond this particular brand and this particular collection of failed products. Premium pricing creates premium expectations. That's not a cultural bias or unfair criticism. It's a contract. When you charge $64 for a candle, you are making a specific, implicit, binding promise to the person handing over that money. You are telling them that the premium they're paying reflects genuine superior quality, genuine superior craftsmanship, genuine superior experience. When the product doesn't deliver on that implicit contract, customers don't just feel disappointed, they feel deceived. And deceived customers don't stay quiet. They write reviews. They share photos. They compare notes. They recognize pet treats repackaged as gourmet garnishes and tell everyone they know about it. The Wickless candle will almost certainly become the defining image of this brand's trajectory, not because it's the worst of the quality failures, but because it's the most complete metaphor. A product that positioned itself as a source of light and warmth and elevated experience that was quite literally incapable of producing any of those things. $64 for a jar of wax that cannot be lit. As ever, more like as if. As if this represents luxury. As if this reflects genuine craftsmanship. As if someone with a freakish attention to detail reviewed the products going out the door and found them satisfactory. The customers who opened those boxes found something the brand apparently didn't anticipate. They found the truth. And in the age of instant communication and social sharing, that truth travels faster than any carefully managed press strategy can follow. The market has rendered its verdict in the clearest possible terms. Products returned unopened. Customer service overwhelmed. High-profile endorsements failing to move inventory. Investigative reporting confirming what customer complaints suggested about sourcing and quality. This is what authentic market feedback looks like when it's unfiltered by celebrity relationships and carefully managed media access. It's not comfortable to observe, but it's honest in a way that no amount of brand positioning can manufacture. Quality is either there when the box is opened or it isn't. Craftsmanship either shows up in the product or it doesn't. Meticulous attention to detail either produces candles with wicks or it doesn't. The customers who spent their money in good faith deserved better. They deserved what they were promised. What they received instead told them everything they needed to know. Subscribe if you want continued coverage of how this situation develops. Like this video if you think consumers deserve honest information about where their money goes. Comment below with your thoughts on celebrity brand responsibility and what companies owe the customers who trust them. Because trust, once lost through crooked labels and missing wicks and repackaged pet treats sold as gourmet garnishes, is remarkably difficult to recover. And the market never forgets.